So, today we've got two fantastic guests. We've got Tony Bookbinder, who has got a fantastic career in music, photographed with lots of famous people, and we've got the lovely Martin Clare from Red House Farm, who is actually with here in his capacity as writer, playwright, producer for Dunham Thespians. So afternoon, both of you. Tony, do you want to introduce yourself a little bit, please?
Good afternoon. Yes, my musical career stems back over 50 years ago. I was fortunate enough to form the Dakotas in Manchester in November in 1960, and
that's Billy J. Kramer and the Dakotas, I recall.
Yes, it was.
Yeah.
But Billy didn't come on the scene because he's from Liverpool till about a few years later. Pete McLean, who was our frontman at that time, and I was playing at the Newton Heath Palais, or the Cresta Ballroom in Manchester, in Failsworth actually. And the manager come up to me and said, this guy, Pete McLean, wants to form a group, and that was it. And he would like you to play drums, because I was a drummer in the dance band. I was only 15 at the time.
Wow.
And one thing led to another. We went for an audition at the Plaza Ballroom in Manchester, just 2 weeks after the late Jimmy Savile left. He was the manager there.
Right. And
the manager there said, I want you to come. We auditioned, and he said, I want you to come back next week, dress up as Red Indians and call yourselves the Dakotas.
Oh, how fantastic. So we're going to have loads of opportunity to look at all of your fascinating time, because I know you've got photographs with all sorts of different people and you've travelled and had a fantastic time of it. And Martin, you're here as a playwright and a producer. Tell us a bit about what you're up to at the minute.
Susan, hi, good afternoon. I'm part of a small Am-Jam group in the Dunham Massey area, so it's sort of fair to say I'm not really the headline act this afternoon, but I'm still thrilled to be here, so thank you for having me on. I've actually written the play that our drama group is doing this time round. It's called The Great Mallard, and obviously, hopefully, we can talk about that a bit later on.
I know I've been promoting that.
I believe you have, thank you for that.
I read out all the intro in a very theatrical voice last week, so I'm sure everybody's waiting with bated breath to hear about that. So let's listen now to Valerie by Amy Whitehouse, and then we'll come back and have another chat, because I'm looking forward to this already.
The sound of Trafford. Trafford Sound.
So we're talking today with Martin Clare and Tony Bookbinder. So Martin, we were talking about the whole writing process and how you come to, because we know Tony's sort of starting to write his autobiography. Indeed. But as far as you're concerned, you've written a few plays, haven't you?
I have, yeah, and usually end up speed writing them. It tends to be, in our case, kind of out of desperation. We really struggle to find plays that we can cast, and I think this is a problem with a lot of small drama groups, is that you end up with a awkward mishmash of ages. Like, we have quite a few kind of younger girls, and then middle-aged men, and then a few senior members, and invariably plays will have couples in them. And so trying to kind of like marry people up, you can sometimes, in a farce or something, you can get away with it, but if it's any sort of serious play, then you can't really get away with the age gaps.
Well, listen to this. On a failing seaside resort, the curiously named Great Mallard Hotel is deserted, save for a solitary member of staff. One by one, a series of unexpected guests arrive, wishing to stay at the hotel, and all requesting to stay in the same room, for which the key is mysteriously missing. It soon becomes apparent that not everyone is who they claim to be, and the motives are not necessarily innocent.
That sounds brilliant.
That sounds really good.
Everyone should go and see that. Yeah.
And it's called The Great Mallard.
Indeed, yeah.
And it's on?
It's on the last week of November, the 22nd to the 25th. So we're on for 4 nights.
Yeah. And it's at the Dunham Massey Village Hall, which is a gorgeous little hall.
It is, yeah.
Tony's been on stage, but we'll come to that in a second, because I just want us to listen now to Bob Marley and the Wailers. What's the longest, Martin, run that you've done with your plays?
We usually just run for 4 nights. We've had odd plays that have been particularly popular where we've had to put on an extra show. Hobson's Choice was one.
Yeah.
We did Jane Eyre last year. We only did that for 4 nights, but we were overbooked every night. We had to squeeze a load of extra chairs in for that one.
So if you're doing something like Hobson's Choice or Jane Eyre, do you get a script in for that, or do you also write the scripts, or somebody else writes the scripts for those in the group?
Well, Hobson's Choice is a classic play, so obviously you get the script in for that. You need to buy the licence. But Jane Eyre was an adaptation that we did ourselves. It was a girl called Laura Kinsella who wrote and produced and made all costumes and did absolutely everything. It was
gosh, that was a labour of love.
A real labour of love, indeed. And
fantastic.
it was a great show, really, really successful production. So.
Yeah, fantastic. Thank you. So this month, Tom Hanks, a collector for more than 30 years, publishes his first collection of short stories, Uncommon Type, all inspired by his beloved typewriters. Apparently he's got more than 300 typewriters. So, Martin.
Yes.
Do you plod away there on your handy typewriter?
No, I'm an IT tech guy, so for me, it's all about using a laptop. I mean, these days, to a certain extent, you think, why would you write any other way? Because it's just so much easier to go back and change things and so on and so forth.
Of course.
But I've done kind of various writing courses and that type of thing. And invariably, one of the exercises they'll always have you do is handwrite with a pen and paper.
Yeah.
There's just something about that mental process that encourages the sort of creative process, I guess.
I agree in a sense, because I do a lot of writing. I've published 3 books, but I know when I'm out somewhere, and everybody who writes is often advised to keep a little notebook handy, and I suspect you do that, Tony, because you're looking to write your autobiography. You sort of suddenly get inspired. You're on the bus.
Well, I run upstairs, you see. The wine's a great one. You're having a couple of glasses of wine, bottles, and I think I start talking to Denise, my wife, about different thing, and I go, oh, hold on, I run upstairs and I write it down because I forget.
And I think that's the thing, sometimes it's quicker. I don't know, it might be for old so-and-so's like perhaps.
Well, it is.
No comment.
Excuse me, but I'll turn you off in a second. But no, the truth is, though, that I will write on scraps of things and corners of my diary, and then by the time I come to write on my laptop, I've kind of got the thing sorted. I mean,
worked out in your head. Yeah, the problem I have is that a lot of my creative ideas come to me when I'm in the shower, which is not ideal. I do tend to take like 45-minute long showers. My girlfriend loves me for that. But even so, that's when I will sort of process things, and because it's usually when you're on your own. Maybe if you're just out walking or something, that's when your brain kind of churns over when you haven't got those distractions.
Well, I suppose as well in the shower, it's almost trance-inductive in the sense that you're there, you're separated out. Yeah. Absolutely, free from distraction. It's a bit of me time, and it's a nice place to allow your mind to just...
but with me, it's 50-odd years ago, so it's difficult to try to remember everything and not exaggerate it.
Well, there's no harm in exaggerating.
You want to...
You can crank things up a notch.
You've got to have a good solicitor.
Okay.
Get done,
And what about us with Pink? What about us with Dunham Thespians? I believe they're coming up to nearly 100 years old.
We're just a few years off our centenary year. It was 1922 it was originally formed. It was actually back in 1921 that just a group of residents from the village decided to put on a play for the entertainment of the village, and it was just so enthusiastically received that the following year they held a meeting at Little Heath School, which is now the village hall, and a drama group was formed under the name the Dunham Thespians.
Wow.
And they had sort of quite a few successful years after that. They did plays like She Stoops to Conquer, The Joan Danvers, and at that time they had to have rehearsals at like people's own homes, and the scenery had to be prefabricated and transported on the night. Yeah. The stage was lit by a single gaslight. It was obviously a completely different time. In the late 1920s, 1929, I think it was, the serving chairman at the time had to resign, and so at that time the society endured quite a difficult few years, And then in 1933, they had to hold a meeting to decide if it would continue, essentially. And judging by the minutes of the meeting, it was quite a heated exchange, I think.
Have you seen the minutes of
I have, yeah. When I became chairman in 2011, and I got all sorts of interesting, sort of documents and things that, that detail the history of the society. So there's quite a lot I only found out quite recently. But they ended up having a vote on it, and it was a majority vote of 1 that ensured it would continue. So it was
skin of your teeth.
It was close. Then a new committee was formed, and again they had quite a few successful years. In the late 30s, they had electricity introduced, and so the first switchboard was created, and it looked like the society would go from strength to strength. And then, of course, in 1939, the country found itself at war, and the society had to be disbanded, along with everything else, of course. And so it was 1946 before they could hold a meeting again to see if it should continue. And fortunately, it was unanimously agreed it would. And then at that time, they actually moved the productions to the Methodist Chapel, which is at the end of Red House Lane.
Oh, right.
So like a literal stone's throw from where I grew up and worked, and that's something I only found out quite recently. And so, again, it did well for quite a few years, but then they had to remove the stage from the chapel. And so at that time, it meant that there was nowhere else they could really perform. So, again, the society had to be disbanded for a short time. And then in the early 60s, that's when there was a management committee formed to convert the old school, what was Little Heath School, into what's now Dunham Village Hall.
Wow.
And so at that time, the Thespian Society agreed to donate all of the small amount of money that they had to put towards the conversion costs, on the proviso that when it was completed, there would be a stage available and that the society could reform. And so in 1964, that's when the alterations were complete, and the Thespians were invited to put on a show for the grand opening of the hall, which they did. And then in late 65, that's when they did their first sort of proper production, which was Blithe Spirit, a classic Noel Coward play. And so basically from there, the society has done sort of 2 plays a year. It's gone from strength to strength, really, and it's like a real sort of bedrock of the village now.
Yes, it is. I mean, I think this is the thing, isn't it? It's a bit like the certain things will come to post offices and theatres and things like this that hold it all together, and also how historically people did entertain each other.
Yeah, they had to.
They'd get in the kitchen with the lamplight and they'd all be singing, or they'd be telling stories, or each member of the group would have a skill set that they would share, and they'd entertain each other. And we're going to entertain you a little bit more now with another music track, and then we'll come back to talking a bit more with my 2 fascinating guests. Shawn Mendes, always good on a Tuesday afternoon. So, let's talk a little bit about the whole writing process, because I'm sure we've got lots of people listening who are interested. Writing by hand. You mentioned this earlier on, Martin, about the whole thing about writing by hand.
Yeah, there's just something about that. It just gets those creative juices flowing. It's hard to explain, but anyone that's done any kind of creative writing course or anything, it's something they will always ask you to do, is write some stuff by hand. Because I did some like sketch writing courses and even things like that. It's always write by hand, because it forces your brain to work in a slightly different way, and it takes you outside of yourself, and that's where creativity comes from.
And I also think we're quite detached. I don't know if you agree with this, but I do think we can be quite detached if we're writing. I mean, I do both. I write by hand and I write a lot of my articles. As I said, I've got 3 books out there, but I know that writing on a laptop, a computer, you're sort of almost detached, because you're thinking, oh, well, I can cut and paste that sentence and move it here and move that around. Whereas if you're writing on paper, you can't do it the same way. Or using an old typewriter, I suppose that's a much slower process, isn't it? Because if you put something in the wrong place, you're stymied, really.
Yeah. You have to use Tipex, which is apparently still a thing.
We sell a lot of it.
Yeah, oh, well,
do you?
Wow.
Yeah, we do.
Oh,
wow, still going. So, yeah, I kind of agree. I mean, the flip side, of course, is that working on a laptop, it's so much more flexible when you come back to edit things and change things. It is much easier, but I suppose it does encourage you to be a bit lazy with your writing, perhaps, and because you can just churn anything out and think, well, I can always just go back and take it out later. It's no big deal.
Do you agree with that though? Because I think sometimes also there can be an argument for getting. I also know from personal experience, if I just get something down on paper, whatever it might be, no matter how dross it ends up being, getting something down on paper, for me that's a starting point.
You have to start. That's people say, oh, I have writer's block, or I don't know where to start. The thing to do is just to start. It doesn't matter if it's complete nonsense. It's just to start, because that's when you kind of slip into that other place, which is where creativity comes from. But you have to start. If you just sit there with a blank page and a cursor flashing away at you, you'll never get anywhere.
I know I've heard some of these famous, crime writers, people who are churning out books all the time. They actually have an office area where they go, of course, but they actually go in at 9 o'clock and work through till 10:30, have a 15-minute break, work through till lunchtime, have a break, and they actually go in and do set hours.
Yep.
Even if they get nothing much down on paper, because they say the discipline of actually committing certain time. And Tony's nodding his head there, but is that how you work, Martin?
It's not. If you do it as a career, I imagine it's quite different. But if you're doing it more as an enthusiast or a hobby or on the side, if you have a full-time job, you kind of can't be that disciplined, I guess. But it is still about discipline. You have to force yourself to write at times when you don't want to.
And the gorgeous George Michael there with Careless Whisper. So we've got underlying themes of writing. Go, Martin Clare.
Wow, on the spot. Whenever you're writing, we were talking about trying to get those creative juices flowing. It's always useful to have a sort of underlying theme or concept that underpins the story that you're writing, whether it's playwriting or screenwriting or anything at all, even an autobiography. It's always useful to have that kind of underlying concept. So, for example, the first play that I wrote, the Mr. Misty Mystery, which is something of a mouthful, the plot essentially was about 4 young girls who are heading into middle age and not happy with where they were in life, so they decide that they're going to steal a painting from the local art centre. Essentially, that's what the plot's about. But the sort of underlying theme that I had running was to do with a theory I'd read about personality archetypes, which essentially says that people fall in social groups. People will fall into one of 4 different archetypes, which is king, warrior, magician, lover. And
just like they're the 4 major arcana in tarot cards, and it's interesting.
Indeed, yeah.
Yeah.
And so it's just a theory. It's not, really based on fact, but it's interesting, and you do see it play out in real life.
You do, because a lot of therapy actually underpins about those archetypes, how people act out those characteristics in a... How fantastic.
In a social group. So what I had was the 4 protagonists of the piece, each represented one of those 4 archetypes. And there's, subtleties to do with how they interact with each other. So king and magician tend to get on well, warrior and lover do, but then warrior and magician are usually at sort of loggerheads. And so that theme was running right throughout the play. And that's the interesting thing from a writer's perspective, but it also adds real sort of depth to the play. And it helps to keep you focused when you're writing.
Yeah. And when you've written a play, I just thinking, that sounds so interesting, a play. Would you ever restage it?
Well, that particular one I've had published, and it has had productions elsewhere. It had one in Spain last year, actually, which I went over to see.
I didn't realise we got an international
I am an international playwright. That's what I call myself. I've actually just sold a reading copy of the scripts to somewhere in America as well, so maybe we'll go on there. I got royalties for that. That was £13.25.
Wow.
I'm still deciding what to do with it. I might invest some of it, I'm not sure, but yeah.
Oh, that's fantastic. It's the buzz, though, isn't it? I know when I sold one of my books to somebody I didn't know, the first time you get a book sold on Amazon, and
even if it's a few quid, you love that money.
It's not just my mates or my clients or my people at the Red House Farm or the post office or something. It's wow. Chainsmokers and Coldplay here on Trafford Sound, and we've had a fascinating chat so far. We've got Tony Bookbinder and we've got Martin Clare, playwright extraordinary. Tony, of course, a long-standing musician, very famous, particularly 60s, 70s, 80s. But Martin, your latest play, tell us a little bit more about the theme behind it, the running.
Yes, well, the Great Mallard, it's called, as we've talked about. As I said with the last play, Mr. Misty, I was talking about the underlying theme. With this one, I wanted to make the theme to do with exposition, which I'm sure most of your listeners will know, but just to explain, exposition is essentially just conveying something to the audience. And a real sort of bugbear of mine is when you get clunky exposition, whereby you'd perhaps have two characters, for example, saying something that they wouldn't ordinarily say. And it's just there purely for the benefit of the audience.
You see that sometimes on some of these American
you see it in film, even big like Hollywood films and stuff. It's amazing how often you'll see, for example, perhaps you'd have say two burglars about to rob a house, and they're there in like the middle of the night. They're all dressed up in black. They have the balaclavas on, and one of them will turn to the other and say, "Now remember, the guy that owns this house is an ex-Marine, so we need to be careful."
Yes.
As if they wouldn't have had that conversation before they got to the house.
I know.
But it's just there to tell the audience so that when they get in the house and,
they save about 3 minutes on the filming.
Exactly. Yeah. I mean, sometimes it's unavoidable. But I've read this great quote that said, the art of great storytelling is knowing what not to tell the audience and when not to tell it to them. Yeah. And that was kind of the quote that I basically wanted to base this play on. And so I've just really tried to leave it as long as I possibly could before I kind of explain to the audience what's actually happening, and try to reveal things in a very natural way, so that the audience kind of finds out what's going on as it progresses in a natural way, rather than just spelling it out to them.
And this is the Great Mallard, and it's on the 22nd to the 25th of November at Dunham Village Hall.
That's the one.
Yeah. Just while we're here on this particular subject, where do you think people can get tickets from? Do you know, Martin?
I do. As it happens, they can go online to our website, which is dunhamthespians.org.uk. You can just buy tickets online there, or there is a phone number you can ring if you don't want to buy online.
Okay, and it's not terrifically expensive either, is it?
It's incredibly cheap. It's a very cheap night out. It's just £7.50 a ticket. We actually have a discounted rate on a Wednesday for £6. There's free parking on site. There's a pub right next door.
What more do you need?
What more do you need for a great night out?
Absolutely fantastic. Thank you. By the way, can I ask either of you, I forgot the most important part, have either of you got a shout out? Anybody listening who you want to say hello to?
Well, I've said hello to Denise and,
yes.
and everybody who knows me at Oldfield Brow.
And what about you, Martin? Is anybody listening, or are they not bothered?
They're probably not bothered, but I will give a shout out to all of my cast and crew who are helping me on the play, so they all know who they are.
Thank you so much for coming in now, guys. We'll have you both back again in no time, I'm sure.
Lovely, thank you.